I think across the board, this might be the most interesting two-legged tie across the entirety of the Europa League's round of 16. Two teams that are well matched in the hunt for the top four in their respective leagues, and with oodles of talent that sometimes feels unfulfilled. Hello and welcome back to UELtras on Ranks FC, the show all about what you need to be watching on Thursday nights in the Europa League and the Europa Conference League. I'm Jack Collins and it's time for the round of 16 where there's plenty to get our teeth into. And as the scene of the drama last time round, it would feel mad not to begin at Old Trafford once again, wouldn't it? Especially with further Spanish opposition on the horizon for Manchester United. Real Betis travelled to Old Trafford knowing the scale of this task, beating a Manchester United side who not only knocked out La Liga's leaders Barcelona in the last round, but will also be desperate to get their season back on track after a humbling at Anfield at the weekend. Betis will be buoyed by that result and by the fact that the second leg of this one is at the Villa Marine, which will be packed and in full voice if they can come out of the first leg still alive in the tie. It's something that obviously was the reverse in the previous round against Barcelona, with the second leg taking place at Old Trafford. But with injury issues plaguing the green and white half of Seville, that looks like a difficult task. Still, the talismanic Nabil Fekir, so often Betis' creative heart, has picked up an injury ruling him out until the end of the season, which is a massive hammer blow to Pellegrini's men. Add that to the fact that on-field captain Joaquin remains Betis captain, but doesn't feature as much as we might imagine these days at 41 years old. It does look uncertain just how Betis find their creative juices in a massive game. But it's not all bad news. It does mean that Betis might well be able to implement a rapid transition on the counter, which was something that we saw Liverpool use to devastating effect at the weekend. Betis will probably use a midfield pivot of World Cup winner Guido Rodriguez and the timeless velvet tank William Carvalho. With that, they can look to soak up pressure and then release pace down both flanks. Last year's top scorer Juanmi should start off that left-hand side, whilst on the right, there's a clamour to see the young Brazilian Luis Enrique. He is effervescent, exciting, brilliant one-on-one, and he took Barcelona apart in the Supercopa semi-finals earlier this year. I think that Pellegrini might choose to deploy him off the bench, but at some point I expect to see Enrique enter the fray. His close control and ability to beat that man are exceptional, although he does remain raw, and at times his decision-making has been questionable, to say the least. But there are plenty interested in him, and I'd imagine there'll be plenty of scouts looking to watch him tonight at Old Trafford. Up top, Borja Iglesias is a handful, simply put. The Panda, as he's affectionately known, has been on flying form for Betis for the best part of 2 years, and he's a brilliant all-round threat. A natural poacher with incredible aerial ability and a dead eye from the penalty spot. The Galician native will be looking to bring others into play before accelerating into scoring positions himself. From a United perspective, the task will be to move on and flip the narrative back from the weekend towards a positive place. It has been a good season for the Red Devils, but headline results can swing a mood. And I think Erik ten Hag will need to get things back under his jurisdiction and away from the newspaper headlines as soon as possible. Changes are, I think, inevitable at this point. Tyrell Malacia will probably come in for Luke Shaw, who was dreadful at the weekend, whilst Aaron Wan-Bissaka might also return on the other flank. Casemiro, Sabitzer and Eriksson have all been noted as either potential or confirmed absentees, meaning that McFred pivot might make a return here. Casemiro is also one booking off a suspension in Europe. So if United want him fit and firing for the second leg, they might just hold him in reserve tonight. I think the interesting thing is maybe at the other end of the pitch, though. Jadon Sancho might well get an opportunity to make his mark after missing last week's FA Cup game against West Ham due to illness and then not featuring in that game at Anfield. And with Wout Weghorst in the middle of a bit of a firestorm, potentially overblown, should we say, but from fans, Ten Hag might just take him out the firing line for this one, meaning Rashford could well play through the middle with Garnacho perhaps getting that nod wide. These then are perhaps the key battles. Betis centre-back Luis Felipe and Herman Petzela are not the most mobile of duos, although they are individually very good one-on-one defenders. If Rashford is hoping to dart in behind them, I think there's joy to be had, whilst whoever plays on United's wings is going to have to work hard, both offensively and defensively, to deal with the dual threat of Juan Miranda and Yusuf Sabali going forward. There's an all-Portuguese duel in the middle of the park between former Sporting teammates William Carvalho and Bruno Fernandes, and that should be one to savour. And then, on top of that, in terms of narratives, there's always the element of Manuel Pellegrini, a former Manchester City manager, returning to Old Trafford as well. Having won the group, Betis will have hoped for an easier tie than this in the round of 16, but counting them out, I think, would be a fool's errand. This season's disciplinary problems have held Pellegrini's side back at times, but on form, they're a match for anybody, and tails will be up tonight to try and cause a major shock at Old Trafford and pile on the misery. Roma are a funny old team, losing to previously winless Cremonese in the league midweek, only to beat a resurgent Juventus at the weekend, dominate Salzburg in the first leg of their playoff tie before conceding in the last minute to lose 1-0, play the second leg and play worse, but come out with a relatively comfortable 2-0 win. None of it makes any sense, but it's heaps of fun, and I can't ask for more than that. Against Real Sociedad, though, they have met an equally unpredictable side. In November, I was asking if Villarreal were in a title race, but they've hit their annual February-March slump, winning just one of their 5 games since the beginning of February. So who comes out on top of this one? Well, at the Olimpico, I'm going to say Roma. Their home form has been resplendent. They've got a 100% success rate in Serie A in 2023. And with a mostly fully fit squad, I expect them to take advantage of Real Sociedad's recent frailties in front of a packed stadium. Bear in mind, this is a stadium that responded to the call last year and drove them all the way to a Europa Conference League final, which they went on to win. Although Tammy Abraham's been rested, benched, whatever you want to call it, in recent games, I think he comes back in here, partnering Paulo Dybala at the top of the pitch and rekindling that relationship, allowing Lorenzo Pellegrini to pull the strings in behind. I like the Dybala and Abraham dynamic. The fact that Tammy's able to stretch leaves more space for Pellegrini and Dybala to work their magic, and I think that both have been at their best when they've been played in tandem this season. Leonardo Spinazzola feels reborn after returning from that long injury layoff that we saw after the Euros, not last summer, the summer before. And with Nikola Zalewski now operating from the right-hand side, Roma's balance has been restored. Gini Wijnaldum is back in business. Gianluca Mancini is fresh off a match-winning performance against Juventus. And Chris Smalling anchors this defence perfectly. Villarreal, though, even in a slump, have the ability to cause Roma problems. Skipper Mikel Oyarzabal has returned to his favoured number 10 role. And in Martin Zubimendi and Mikel Merino, the Real Sociedad pivot is secure and solid. The problem has been scoring goals. Alexander Sorloth and Carlos Fernandez have both struggled of late in front of goal, and their supporting cast, including the incredibly talented duo of Brais Mendes and Takefusa Kubo, have not stepped up in the way that they were doing ahead of the international break. That said, as with all slumps, all it takes is one bit of cloud to break and the good times can feel like they're just around the corner again. Just ask Chelsea fans this week. There is undoubted ability here, and Imanol Alguacil is a wonderful manager at the club he loves. I think across the board, this might be the most interesting two-legged tie that the round of 16 has to offer in the Europa League. Two clubs that are well matched, both in the hunt for a top 4 place in their respective leagues, with oodles of talent that sometimes feels unfulfilled. My head says that Roma edge it at the Olimpico, and we go back to Donostia with this one in the balance. But there are so many flashpoints that this one could really go anywhere. Don't miss it. A third clash of heavyweight names is a good thing for the Europa League generally, but this clash has perhaps not got the fanfare that it might have in a different context. Most of that is probably due to Sporting's league position and the fact that the green and white side of Lisbon are struggling to replicate what has been a wonderful previous 2 years. They're 15 points behind cross-city rivals Benfica at the summit of the Primeira, but more than that, they currently find themselves outside the top 3 and therefore the Champions League qualification spots for next season, with Braga 5 points ahead of them and threatening to infiltrate Portugal's big 3. Whilst Braga have been banging on the door for a while there, the fact remains that there's only been one instant in the last decade where they have managed to leapfrog Sporting back in the COVID-disrupted 2019-20 season. So if things were to remain as they are right now domestically, I think there's little doubt that Sporting fans would see this season as a travesty, especially when things looked so bright just a year ago. With Arsenal's relentless domestic form and current position 5 points clear at the top of the Premier League table, there are many who will suggest that this one is already done and dusted, but I think that's probably premature, even if Arsenal are rightly heavy favourites. First of all, in the case for the defence, is the fact that Sporting find themselves on a good run all of a sudden. After a dreadful performance in the first leg, the home leg, of their playoff round tie against Midtjylland, things have picked up. They absolutely wiped the floor with the Danes back on their own patch, with Pedro Gonçalves scoring twice and starring in a 4-0 win. And they followed it up with back-to-back league wins as well. This remains a very settled team who play exclusively in a 3-4-3 under Ruben Amorim. Veteran skipper Sebi Coates is flanked by the exceptionally talented Gonzalo Inacio and summer recruit Jeremiah St. Just, who's starting to find his feet, I think, in Lisbon. In front of them, Hidemasa Morita and Manuel Ugarte provide a solid defensive shield, with Ugarte in particular one of the standout defensive midfielders in Europe this season, and one who should, and is, I think, be on the radar of a host of clubs. Morita I like as well. He came in to replace Joao Palhinha, who obviously came to Fulham in the summer. He's not the same kind of player. He's actually a little bit more of an attacking threat, but he's one of those players that links up well in the summer and can in the kind of middle of the pitch and can do lots of different things in one go. He's a really, really good player, and they're a really, really nice pairing. And in the front three, Pedro Gonçalves and Marcus Edwards will flank the number 9. Edwards has shone since his move from Vitória Guimarães to the capital. He remains a master ball manipulator with the ability to open games up and make things happen in an instant. It isn't lost on me that he is also a former Tottenham Academy player playing against Arsenal. I imagine the narratives are already written there. Gonçalves has been likened to Bruno Fernandes, but I think that's a stretch. He's a wonderful goal threat, and whilst he can strike from distance like his countrymen, much of his best work, I think, comes within the penalty area, where he can get close to his target man and feed off what gets knocked down. He's lovely in tight spaces. He's a really, really good finisher. I think that there's more of a kind of Dybala vibe about him, perhaps, than maybe a Bruno Fernandes. It remains to be seen who that target man will be, but I'm really hoping that it will be 18-year-old Yusuf Chamiti. He's been a revelation since coming into the first team picture, and is one of the talents I've spent the recent weeks waxing lyrical about on the podcast. He's excellent in the air. He's 6'2", you'd expect that, but he's got sharp feet and an eye for a clever pass. He works the channels well, and Amorim seems to trust him. I think he's earned a chance to show what he can do on a big stage, and this is a big stage. I mean, flipping to Arsenal, the big question remains as to how hard Arteta rotates for this game, with a trip to Craven Cottage in the league just 3 days afterwards. My instinct is that we see quite a heavy rotation. Matt Turner in goal, Rob Holding and Jakub Kivior making his full debut. Ben White and Takehiro Tomiyasu are going to have to play, I think, because Kieran Tierney has been struck down with illness ahead of this one. I think Jorginho will start alongside Granit Xhaka, with Fabio Vieira playing as the more advanced 8. He returns to Portugal, obviously where he came from Porto. Here, the Sporting fans, I imagine, will give him a nice, warm, welcome reception in opposite land. But up top, I think, is where it gets interesting for Arsenal. With Gabriel Jesus still not fit, Eddie Nketiah and Leandro Trossard both out, the rotation options for Arsenal in the forward line remain quite minimal, I think. 3 of Emil Smith-Rowe, Bukayo Saka, Gabriel Martinelli and weekend hero Reece Nelson are going to have to get the nod unless Arteta looks deep into his youth squads. It's been reported that Ruel Walters and Mauro Bandeira were both training with the first team ahead of this one, so perhaps they'll get a look in off the bench. You add all this to Hector Bellerin coming up against his old club, and I think it's set for a closer evening than perhaps many would have expected. With Arsenal drawing ever closer to a first Premier League title in nearly 2 decades, how heavily Arteta rotates tonight could also make or break this tie. Shakhtar progressed against Rennes in one of the most dramatic games of the Europa League so far, winning 2-1 at home. They found themselves 1-0 behind after 90 minutes of the reverse fixture, and it looked like all hope was lost for the Ukrainians when Jeremy Doku danced through in extra time. They looked so tired at this point to put a goal on a plate for Ibrahim Salah. But in the dying seconds, a hopeful ball into the box was looped over his own keeper by Rennes' 18-year-old centre-half, Samuel Belocian, sending the tie to penalties. Then Shakhtar went 3-1 up in the shootout after 3 rounds each. They needed to either score one of their final 2 or for Rennes to miss either of theirs to win the tie. Obviously, Rennes scored both. Valerie Bondar and Danilo Sikan both missed for Shakhtar to send us through to sudden death. We're on the 7th penalty kick. Kevin Kelsey finally sent Shakhtar through. It was a nerve shredder, one where emotions fluctuated wildly throughout, but Shakhtar were in the hat where they drew Feyenoord, who are currently top of the Eredivisie table and having a special season of their own. With 10 games to go in the league, they're currently 3 points clear of their great rivals Ajax at the summit, and they're doing it with a really talented young squad, maybe best summed up in their midfield. Orkan Kökçü is the captain. He's one of our favourites here on Ranks. And he plays as kind of a deep-lying quarterback, getting forward at times to unleash rockets, but mostly dictating the pace of the game. He does have 10 goals in all competitions this season, though. Next to him, Mats Wife has added some steel after coming into the side after a summer move from Excelsior. And Sebi Szymanski, the Polish international, plays as a more traditional number 10, darting around either side of his number 9 to get into the box and create. On the wings, it's been mostly Javairo Dilrosun, who's heaps of fun, one to watch if he plays tonight, and Alireza Jahanbakhsh, who Brighton fans will remember. The great Mexican hope Santiago Jimenez rotates with Danilo in the number 9 role, although it has been the Mexican who's been given the nod of late. His hold-up play and ability to bring the 3 behind him into the game really starting to shine through. It leaves some interesting options off the bench. Danilo has only scored 1 fewer goal than Jimenez and often comes off later to make a difference. And then there's the Brazilian winger, Igor Paixão, who joined in the summer. He's absolutely electric on his day. And journeyman Usama Idrissi provides a little bit of experience. And I think this is important to note because the experience coming from a 26-year-old is a little bit rogue. Often, the average age of Feyenoord's starting 11 is just 23. Only Groningen and Vitesse, who are both obviously notable feeder destinations for young loan players, average out younger in this season's Eredivisie. Shakhtar's squad is notably heavily loaded with Ukrainian players after that FIFA directive that foreign players could move elsewhere for free or suspend their contracts after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. But there's plenty of talent here too, and goalkeeper Anatoly Trubin is one of the most highly rated youngsters in Europe, whilst in front of him, Matvienko and Bondar have formed a strong bond, excuse the pun. Veteran Taras Stepanenko anchors the midfield, guiding through the bright young lights ahead of him, Bondarenko and Sudakov. And I think up top, there's Lassina Traore, not that one, not the one that you remember, but actually the one that was once a star of the Ajax production line. Still only 22, he's thrived since he arrived at Shakhtar in 2021. Technically gifted and physically able to bully defenders, his line leading was absolutely crucial to Shakhtar's progress in the competition. This is a really good matchup between two teams that feel well suited and at a similar level. It's another good test for a lot of young players starting to catch fire on the European stage, and one that I predict going to the wire in the second leg in Rotterdam. And with that, we head over to the Conference League, where we've already seen the week's headline tie play out due to a clash between Roma and Lazio both being at home in the first leg. RZ stunned the Olimpico on Tuesday night, beating Lazio 2-1, with inspired Jesper Karlsson providing both assists for the Dutch side. And now Maurizio Sarri's side have a real uphill struggle in Alkmaar in the second leg, but we'll deal with that properly next week. So on to tonight. I spoke about Anderlecht at length on the last episode, wondering if they had the capacity to turn things around against Ludogorets. Fair play to them, they did. They edged out the Bulgarian champions on penalties after beating them 2-1 in normal time. Since then, they've drawn the Belgian Clasico 2-2 against Standard Liège and lost to Ghent, meaning that they're worse off in the league than last time when I said they were having a stinker of a season domestically. And sadly for Anderlecht fans, this draw means I think it's about to be sayonara for them in Europe as well. Villarreal rank among the favourites to win the Conference League. And despite going through a rough patch in February, Quique Setien appears to have steadied the Yellow Submarine in the last few weeks. The Madrigal Meazza, Gerard Moreno, one of my favourite players on the planet, marked his return to action with a goal at the weekend, whilst El Comandante, Jose Luis Morales, has led the line well in his absence. When you throw in the attacking ability of Samuel Chukwueze, Jeremy Pino, Nicholas Jackson, Alex Baena, as well as the guile of Dani Parejo and Giovanni Lo Celso, I really can't see anything other than a Villarreal win in this one. Anderlecht can take heart from their home performances against Ludogorets and Standard though, and the fact that they scored twice in each of those games. Islam Slimani forced the first goal and set up the second in the last round, and then bagged twice in that Clasico, and he started to find his feet, which can only be a good thing in the absence of Fabio Silva, who departed in January for PSV, obviously recalled by Wolves from that loan spell at Anderlecht and sent straight out to PSV, where he's really struggled to get minutes. But Slimani's battle with Raul Albiol in particular, two grizzled old veterans having a big old tussle, should be entertaining. Whilst Yari Visharan, the great young hope of Anderlecht's creative hub, should relish his battle with Dani Parejo, who is a master of that art. Visharan is a man in demand, one of the bright lights of this new Belgian generation, and seeing what he can do against a team of Villarreal's quality is reason alone to watch this game. But if you need more, there's always the Setien factor. Quique Setien, Villarreal head coach, is a law unto himself. Beloved at Betis, battered at Barcelona, Setien is a football purist who believes firmly in the principle of playing open games and outscoring your opponent. Think Kevin Keegan, if they score 3, we'll score 4. It doesn't always work, but it's always entertaining. He's one of my favourite coaches in the game in terms of viewing quality. One of the reasons I fell in love with Betis in the first place. And this competition feels like it's opening up nicely for him to have some fun. Finally, we come to Transnistria and a side that after the first leg of the previous round, few thought that we'd be seeing in the round of 16. But it turns out that if you write them off, Sheriff don't like it. Who knew? After losing at home to Partizan in the first leg, Sheriff went 1-0 down in the second, and to all intents and purposes, the side from Belgrade were cruising into the round of 16. But Sheriff won and converted a penalty, and then Mohamed Diop, a centre midfielder who hadn't scored all season, thumped in 2 absolute beauties either side of half-time, turning the tie on its head. And Sheriff never looked back. This is a side who beat Shakhtar and then Real Madrid at the Bernabeu last season. I think it's time that we stop writing them off. There's a spirit, a never-say-die attitude about this Sheriff team. They keep making things happen in European competition. They have good players going forward and they know how to get through these kind of ties. Major respect to Sheriff. Perhaps slightly unjustly, they were rewarded for their heroics with one of the toughest draws that they could have been handed, although we probably wouldn't have been saying that a few months ago. Nice had an awful start to the year, but having replaced Lucien Favre with Didier Degas, they've been climbing the Ligue 1 table steadily, and they produced some really impressive results of late. They hammered Monaco away from home in the derby a fortnight ago. They put Marseille to the sword in the Velodrome. They beat high-flying Lens on their own patch and thumped Montpellier 6-1 to announce their return from the winter break. In fact, Nice haven't lost a game since January the 7th. They've picked up 6 wins and 3 draws in that time, and they are rolling. Kefren Turan, brother of Marcus and son of Lilian, looks set for superstardom in midfield. He's one of Europe's most exciting young talents in the centre of the park. Terem Moffi, signed from Lorient in January, has exploded into life in attack of late. Kasper Schmeichel looks back to his best in goal. Aaron Ramsey is playing good football again. Never, ever thought I'd be saying that again after the World Cup that he had. Bilal Brahimi is having an absolute purple patch, especially off the bench. And the whole thing looks cohesive again, which is really impressive in a way that it never did under Favre. Degas is a Nice legend. He was once of Middlesbrough, some of you might remember, has brought together a side that is both exciting and well-drilled. And Nice have become one of the best watches in European football right now. So there's that. Nice have been devastating away from home and have all the tools to finally shoot the Sheriff. But am I writing off the Transnistrians? Well, you know I'm not that bold. That's all for today on UELtras. What a Thursday night we have ahead of us once again. As ever, thank you so much for watching. Please do share this with any other lovers of these two brilliant competitions. And I will see you next week for the second legs. Take it easy and long live the UELtras.